Kansas City Chiefs. I want to send a huge thank you to all athletic trainers for helping keeping me healthy so that I can play the games that I love. Have a great VNATA.
Hello, this is Eric Stonestreet of the TV show, the former has-been, probably already forgotten TV show Modern Family. I was on it with Sofia Vergara. Ring a bell? Anything? No? Anyway, just wanted to give you a quick message to say thank you for everything you do as athletic trainers to keep our players happy and healthy and safe so they can play the games that they love. Your role is vital, no doubt. I've been up close and personal with the Kansas City Chiefs and seeing how hard that staff works, and no doubt you all are the same way. So have a great Venata, and stay safe and appreciate all your work. Cheers.
Hello, NATA. I'm Marisa Burnett, your NATA Vice President and District 9 Director, and I'd like to welcome you to the VNATA. COVID might be keeping us apart, and District 9 is sure missing hosting you in Atlanta, but at least we can all be together virtually and share in some great programming and fantastic CEUs. I hope that this will be a great convention experience for you all, and we sure hope to see you back in District 9 in Orlando for 2021. Enjoy.
Welcome, everyone. During the live VNATA event, presenters for this session are standing by in the chat box to answer your questions. You can also use this feature to chat with other attendees. During the on-demand portion of VNATA, the chat feature will not be available. Thank you for being here at VNATA. Enjoy the session.
How can we find what's been lost? Retrace steps, find out the cause. Over and over, what went wrong? Just remember, stand tall, be strong. When you're just 16 minutes from home, know with us you are never alone. We will always remember the ones lost just 16 minutes from home. From home. Taking steps into the unknown. But all that we've learned is what they have shown. Maybe the stars will guide them home, and the path forever lit will again be flown. When you're just 16 minutes from home, know with us you are never alone. We will always remember the ones lost just 16 minutes from home. Heroes alive with the strength to believe. You set sail for the stars where you dreamed us to be. They thought you were lost just to find out the truth. It is straight for the heart on an infinite route. We know that you're gone, but your dream lives on through the hearts of the ones who when you're just 16 minutes from home. No, with us you are never alone. And we will always remember the ones lost just when you're just 16 minutes from home. No, with us you are never alone. We will always remember the ones lost just 16 minutes from home. You are home. That's when you're truly home.
Hello there. My name is Mary Kirkland, and I am the athletic training supervisor at Kennedy Space Center, and I manage the Rehab Works Clinic for the employees. And this is Mike Chinelli.
Hi, my name is Mike Chinelli. I'm the program manager for NASA's Apollo Challenger Columbia Lessons Learned program. I'm so excited to be here today with all of you.
Yes, we're both extremely excited, and we decided that we wanted to do this almost as kind of a podcast interview type of a session to talk about the lessons learned from the loss of the Space Shuttle Columbia and how that can relate to avoiding complacency in our athletic training profession. So we thank you very much for your time and attention during this session. And although we can't be there in person, we will be available on the Monday for questions, and also you'll be able to contact us afterwards with any kind of questions. So before we go into too much detail, I'm going to be handing it over to Mike and to talk about his extreme wealth of knowledge with regards to this topic and the loss of Columbia and the impact that had on us. For myself, I've been working at Kennedy Space Center for 31 years, and I went through that experience of losing Columbia. And I think for all of us there at that time, it was devastating. And NASA worked very diligently in learning about those things. And Mike not only talks about Columbia, but also Apollo 1 and Challenger, and how we can take all those lessons and make use of them and find a way to translate that to our fantastic profession of athletic training. So go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Mary, so much. I appreciate that. And again, thank you for the invitation to be here with you today. When Mary broached the idea about doing this collaboration together, I can't be more thankful for that, because I think it's a wonderful connection between the athletic training world and what we do here in launch operations and NASA in general. So I think the connection, and I think through this presentation, you're going to see the connection in so many different points and areas. So I'm excited about that. So again, thank you for that. When we lost our crews, first with Apollo 1 back in 1967, with Challenger in 1986, and with Columbia most recently in 2003, they were very difficult times for us. It took at least 2.5 years to return to flight. It was a very emotionally difficult time, but it was also a time where we had to really look inside of ourselves and really look for the answers of what happened, how do we fix it, and how do we go on, and to ensure that this will not happen again to the best of our abilities. So it was a very soul-searching experience, if you will. What we do now with this is we look at these examples and these situations in history through different lenses. And I think the connection through the athletic training world, although it's I'm not as familiar with all of you are in that, it's just amazing the synergies and the connections we have for that. And we're going to step through and talk about a couple different areas that I think the connection is really close. I'm going to share what we learned in those areas, and then the connections with athletic training as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have had the honor and privilege of spending time in the artifacts room with Mike, where you see parts of Columbia that have been brought back, reconstructed, and they all tell a story. And the story that they tell relays not only to areas and subjects within NASA and STEM programs, but also through industry. And these are lessons learned that we as an athletic training profession and you as athletic training students can take home. And one of the first topics, Mike, that I wanted to kind of cover is that synergy between lessons learned for Columbia with regards to communication and how important that was, how that was part of the issue with the loss of Columbia. And then again, we can talk how that would translate for our athletic training profession.
Certainly, definitely, Mary. That's a big one. Actually, when we look at the accident and the leading causes of the accident, contributing causes, communication was near the top, if not the top cause for the accident. And when you look at accidents in general, you'll see that communication is typically in the top 5, if not number 1. So also what's interesting about communication is it's something, it's kind of sneaky because it's something we do all day long, right? We communicate all day long. We can communicate today in so many different ways, right? So we're not only just talking verbally to each other, but in today's virtual world that we're going into, we're doing it through social media. We're doing it through video chats. We're doing it, of course, through the phone, through emails. There's such a multitude of ways to communicate, tweets and everything else, right? So there could be a false impression, perhaps, that since we're communicating more and more, it doesn't necessarily translate to communicating more effectively. We want to make sure folks realize that. So when we look back at our accidents, for example, in Columbia's case or in Challenger's case, there's lots of direct examples of where we didn't communicate very effectively, and there were consequences for that. So, for example, in Columbia's case, there were points where different organizations were not effectively sharing information with each other. So some groups knew that there were some issues with some of our components. Other groups that were related to that didn't even know about that. And when we don't have that connection and that sharing of information freely back and forth, that sets up propensity for issues to happen. When you go back to Challenger, it was a similar thing. We had issues that were being worked, in this case, on the solid rocket boosters before flight, the night before launch. And we actually had the folks that were working in a different state at a different NASA center working it feverishly. Yet the folks at the Cape, at the Kennedy Space Center, weren't even familiar those conversations were happening. And they were actually working towards the same launch the next morning. So unfortunately, we didn't have the connection. They call it stovepiping in some ways. It's so easy to run off with our teams and our groups, perhaps your patients or something, but it's a very tight group of folks that have that information. And when you don't share it, you lose out on great ideas coming into it, but you also don't have that second set of eyes verifying it and double checking, is this something good, or somebody might notice something else in the situation. So we really push on our engineering staffs to communicate with each other, talk about things. There's no bad questions. There never is. It's an open, free speech space, if you will, that bring your issues forward. Feel it as a safe space to talk about issues, but communicate. I can tell you as a former NASA test director on Launch Countdown, when you'd ask the launch team, how are we doing? Are there any issues currently? When the nets went silent or very quiet, you may think that was a good feeling. Well, in some ways it was a good feeling, but in other ways it was a little disconcerting because we knew the complexities of what we all do, right? So when the complexities are there and you're not hearing anything back, you get a little bit nervous. Why aren't I hearing at least something? So it might be, for example, and I'll just offer this, if you're talking to a patient perhaps, and the patient doesn't give much feedback to you, or if the patient's not getting much feedback from the trainer, I'd humbly suggest, perhaps there is something else going on, but we're not sharing as much. Same thing as in the firing room. If I'm not getting information from our test team, yes, maybe everything is going perfectly right, and at times it is, but likely there's other layers of issues that are not being exposed. So that follows up maybe a second question, a third question, or building that trust amongst the teams so that communication bubbles up and we get to have an honest, frank discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a huge translation of those concepts within our athletic training profession, and especially with you as students, because you may feel because of your age or your level of education in the profession, and you're not certified as yet or newly certified, that what you have to say doesn't carry as much weight as a staff member or someone who has been in the business for a number of years. That communication with a patient, your athlete, a coach, a parent, a school board member, a hospital employee, manager, all those individuals, the ability to be able to communicate succinctly and honestly about a situation, to get your thoughts and feelings across, to convey important components about your patient's care and current situation. I mean, you have your immersion setting when you're at secondary school and a player's gone down, and you have to communicate with sidelines, communicate with the EMTs, communicate on the radio and have those plans in place. Being able to communicate at the collegiate level with the staff and taking care of your student athlete as patient in a rehabilitative process, and be able to communicate with the individual who's responsible for the rehabilitation program and the plan of care, and how is that patient doing through that healing continuum of care. So that's a big part of it, and to ensure that communication occurs and that the individual is actually hearing what you're saying. And you mentioned, as far as stovepiping, I believe was the term, I call it kind of siloed communication, because if it stays within that one area, it doesn't do any good. You have to be able to communicate beyond your sphere of influence, so that what needs to be conveyed is conveyed to all the stakeholders and influencers involved. And I also appreciate you talking about how people are communicating currently, because it's very different from when you and I were in school. Smoke signals and,
And she's not kidding either. That's true. That's a true story.
It's a true story. The phone where you would ring and then you'd miss a number and you'd have to start all over again, and you'd have a big phone line, and you have to pull it away from the main family room and close it off in your bedroom. But I'm really digressing. Sorry. But keeping in mind how you're communicating currently is very fast. But is it as effective as that one-on-one of being with someone, having that eye contact, seeing the body language, and ensuring that the tone of what you're trying to say is being conveyed, and that they're picking up what you're lying down. And you can tell a lot by a person's body language. And I'll have patients in the clinic where I'll be like, so have you been doing your home program? And they're like looking, yeah. And I'm like, okay, do you want to try that again and look at me? Okay, yeah, I've been doing it. I'm like, okay, let's try one more time. Look me in the eye and tell me that you've been doing what I've asked you to do, because that's what's going to make you better. And eventually they're like, oh, no, I haven't. And so there's a lot that goes into direct interpersonal conversation. And this is one of the reasons why Mike and I wanted to do this complacency talk with you in this kind of a format, because it allows both of us who have a great love of NASA and the space program. I'm second generation. My dad worked the Apollo program and the shuttle program. And I've been out there, like I said, for 31 years. Mike, you've been out there for how long?
4.
Okay. So, it gets in your blood and it becomes important to you. But athletic training is important to us, right? And improving our abilities within the profession and improving the profession overall takes communication. That's a key piece. So if it's not in your wheelhouse, not your skill set, then figure out who to go to and what resources to find to become a better communicator and practice that. A lot of communication, at least like written communication, is really shortened anymore because of all the texting that's going on, and or just not maybe reading as much, like real books.
And that's happened to us as well. And we're trying to share is we embrace the new technologies. We think it's wonderful. NASA's embracing that, all the different ways to do that. But we say with that embracing, you also have to be careful and be cognizant of the limitations of those. So, for example, and Mary perfectly said it, when we look back at Columbia, for example, in the accident review, there were a lot of folks that reported, I didn't get that same information. So we have to remember, we send an email. Well, we've all been in email jail, right? We didn't get that email. So some folks aren't getting the information. Or sometimes we've had people in the accident reports report back, well, I didn't interpret the information the same way as you did. So I read that, but I didn't know you wanted me to do something with information. I didn't know the intent of it. I didn't know if it was actionable information only. So what we share with our folks is kind of going back to that old school that Mary was talking about. There's something, it's been tried and true for thousands of years, right? The face-to-face, eye-to-eye, direct contact, you can never replace that. And that is, and you perfectly said it, Mary, because that is so essential for us. Reading an engineer's body language when they're reporting a problem, looking to their eyes, understand what they're telling you, really turning the ears on to listen, not just hear it, but listen to what they're saying is unbelievably critical. And missing those things can be so difficult and can cause more problems. I can tell you, being in the firing room, when someone would communicate and say there's an issue, you have to have your listening skills turned up all the way on max. It's critical because, so for example, somebody would report something in, and this happened before, it's a critical situation. You may have only seconds to act on that information. We're not able to, in some cases, ask the second, third, fourth, fifth follow-up question. You've got information, you've got to act on it, and maybe within seconds to save life or billions of dollars. So that's twofold, right? So it's incumbent upon the person that's receiving the information. You've got to have your listening skills as adept and open as you possibly can. But also goes to another part, if I can share with you, is the transmitter of that information. You've got to do your very best in transmitting and sharing the information, right? How you share it, how you say it can mean all the difference in the world. And again, listening on those nets, when I heard an engineer's voice or tone, I'm listening for the tones. I'm listening for how they're telling me this information. I'm picking up those clues, right? Because I can't, again, ask those questions. So perhaps it's maybe similar. I'll offer that as an idea in the athletic training world, where perhaps through the condition of the patient, maybe you're not getting the information crisp and clear as if they're sitting at home in their Barca lounger, right? Maybe it's being transcribed to you in a certain way. And maybe it's kind of got the fuzziness on it, but also the instructions perhaps suggest, being a patient myself at times, what the doctor or the trainer is saying to me, how they're saying it. Sometimes you're hanging on every single word. I know I am. What is the doctor saying? How is he saying it? Is he looking at me? Is he kind of got, you're okay, but his eyes are down here? Picking up on all those things, no different than us, right? So if I'm trying to learn what an engineer or somebody's telling me, or what the crew on board is telling me on the loops, I'm trying to pick up all those clues to really understand, are we okay? Do we need to do something? Do we need to do emergency action to save the crew? Or if we're working a technical issue, like we were doing Columbia and Challenger and the other ones, I really need to listen, because when you read the accident reports, very frankly, at times we did a very poor job of listening to what other people were telling us. And we also did a poor job of sharing that information. So that is absolutely critical. In our business, it's cost us lives. And that's why we're so dedicated to sharing this information with everyone else and saying, we've lived through this is what we've learned, and please take that into your industries and your professions, and be cognizant of both the mistakes we've made and also the times we've actually got it really right.
And we do have to move on to a few other kind of categories within complacency that I wanted to deal with, but those are exceptional points. And before we close out on communication, As an athletic trainer and as an AT, I will communicate to Mike before we continue on further to have AT or athletic trainer as opposed to trainer.
Okay.
So
Lesson learned.
always, constantly learning. Round of applause from the audience. Woo! Okay. So trust is the next kind of category that I was wanting to talk about. And gosh, we could probably spend the rest of our talk on trust because it's something that you develop within families, within your friendships, within your colleagues at work, and especially with your student athletes, the patients in your care. And there's a significant bond that develops and the trust that is part of that relationship that you embedded in your workplace setting, in your college, university setting, at the secondary school, all of those areas, you are building that trust and that rapport with the student athletes, but also with all those other stakeholders and influencers. And say at the high school, you have the janitor, you have other teachers, you have the school nurse, you have the AD, all those individuals that you're building up trust with. And for me, that's one of the big things that I'm quite proud of at RehabWorks, of the trust that the employees have in me and my skill set as an athletic trainer, and coming to the RehabWorks clinic for any kind of orthopedic issues. And they'll come to us first so that they give us first crack at coming up with a diagnosis and really listening to them. And we take about an hour of our time in clinic for consults and initial evaluations and really delving down to see what's going on. So, Mike, if you could springboard off that and talk about the trust component with Columbia and with the management of, that bond of trust to say what needs to be said and make the right moves.
Definitely. And I can say about trust in our business, trust is everything. It all comes down to trust because in our case, we're asking our friends, our colleagues, and our coworkers to get on top of basically a nuclear bomb, right? They're getting on top of millions of pounds of propellant, and then we're going to light that in a couple hours after they get on board, and then we're going to send them at 17,500 miles an hour through space, hundreds of miles up in orbit, to find a little spot in orbit to dock with a space station or do a rendezvous with a satellite or whatever the mission is. So we're asking them to do a lot, right? And then when they do that, and you watch, if you ever watch the crews walk out of crew quarters, it's an exciting moment. We're all cheering. But also there's a very powerful part of that moment that folks may not think about. Off in the distance behind the cameras, their families are there. You might not see that on television, but they're there. We're there. And when you see their families there, they're waving to their loved ones. They're hoping to see them in a number of days or weeks. So we place a lot of trust. They place a lot of trust in us to make sure they get back home to the family. So trust is everything. So I can tell you when the accidents happened and the crews did not come home, that was beyond heartbreaking to us. Okay, that was devastating to us because we do that. We would do everything in our powers as we believe we can to make sure the vehicles are in the best shape they can be, the crews are trained as best and proficient as they can be, and the missions are ready. And we give them that go. We say go for launch. That's not just a word. There's a lot of work before you use that word go. And I've had the honor to give that word, and it's a lot of weight on your shoulders to say that because you know what you're committing them to, and the risks also you're potentially committing them to. So trust is everything, but it doesn't just start on launch day. It starts way before that. So we tell our engineers and our folks, you've got to build those bonds. You've got to build those relationships. And if you ever want to, I'm not sure in your profession you can share how it works, but in our world, when you tell engineers and scientists, we start talking about relationships, that warm, fuzzy stuff, they all get squishy and squirmy, and you watch them kind of doing one of these maneuvers. They don't like that, right?
The moonwalk.
They back away, and because engineers, scientists, ones and zeros, give me this very clear, black and white, nothing gray, just give me that. So when you start talking the squishy stuff, but it's critical because the people component is essential that we get that part right. I always kind of joke when I'm talking to folks, and I say, the physics, the chemistry, the math, the rocket science, if you will, that's the easy stuff. that really is the easy stuff, right? I mean, we kind of got that figured out. Isaac Newton and Galileo and all those folks started off, and we kind of took it from there, and we kind of got that part figured out. The part that gets us is honestly the simple stuff, but it's the hardest. It's that communication. It's the relationship building. It's the trust building. All those interpersonal things, the people part of the equation. That's where we find out we have the difficulties. And when you look back at it's Columbia, it's the lack of sharing information across organizations, fearful of maybe consequences coming back. Maybe it's the tone of voice of how you used something. You didn't have trust between two organizations, so maybe you use a little bit more force in your decision making instead of inviting discussion, debate, and dissension. You're using more force and kind of hammering your way through. And then what that does is you're breaking down levels of trust. So you really can't have that, and it starts with everyone, right? So for example, when I had the honor to be in the firing room and leading the launch team, I'm just one player. I'm just in one position. There are thousands of people that got us to that moment, right? So that didn't just start just launch day. That started months before that with folks that were turning wrenches and turning bolts, changing pressures on gauges, filling propellant tanks, all the way up through. So if we don't have trust on all those levels, we're not going to get to launch day, and we're not going to have a successful launch day. So we share that with our folks. Trust is everything. Relationships are everything. And what's sometimes easy to do in this world, I'll humbly suggest, is sometimes we think because we're perhaps friends on a certain social media platform, or we send a message that they're a friend or we're relating. And again, going back old school, nothing replaces actually building the trust, looking at people's eyes, building your reputation up so somebody can trust you. I'm sure trust between an injured patient and somebody that's performing care on them is critical.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure it's probably no different than us and the crew, right?
Yeah. And the other thing to keep in mind, in addition to trust between individuals, is to trust yourself as well and trust your skill set. Because again, as students learning the trade of athletic training, there's a lot of information, and if you're doing it right, you're going to learn every single day. And at least I find that for myself. There's always something new that's coming in the door, and you have to learn a new medical term or a new treatment modality or a new rehabilitative skill set. So you have to trust your abilities and your ability to learn, and say, yes, because of that, I know what I'm doing. And that trust that you have in yourself is conveyed to your patients and to your other faculty and staff that you're working with. And for some folks, it doesn't come naturally to feel that, to have that confidence that comes from trusting your knowledge base. And I still remember to this day when I was going through undergrad and trying to read this information in my athlete training textbook, and then all of a sudden it was just there. I was studying for an exam and it was there, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't have to think about that. I can, study something else, and the feeling was just amazing. Or when you get your credentials, you pass the BOC exam, and now you're a certified athlete trainer, and that feeling significantly enhances the trust you have in yourself and your abilities. So. Yes, again, there are so many ways that we can weave this one word trust, between coworkers and between the patient and the athletic trainer and, within yourself. We do need to move along though, because the next thing I want to talk about is diversity and bias, and how acknowledgement and addressing those kind of issues helps us to avoid complacency in our athlete training profession. And goodness, Mike, what a time in this world, in this day and age, to talk about the value of diversity and bias and recognizing it within ourselves, within our communities, within our profession, and how to overcome that, because we've seen of late how negative the effects of bias and towards that diversity. And one of the things that I really enjoyed as I was delving back into Columbia And again, this is your wheelhouse. You know this crew and you know these people like the back of your hand. But the Columbia STS-107 crew was extremely diverse. So if you could talk about that and what maybe you build as a team.
Definitely. That's a great point, Mary. It's true. When you think of the crews that we have on board, everything's astronauts kind of cut out of the same cardboard cutout, right? They're heroes and they kind of fit that mold. And they do have a lot of similar qualities between a lot of them. But the diversity of the crews is really amazing when you get to know them and have the honor to become friends with them and know them. 107 was a really spectacular example. We had different races, different genders, different religions, different nationalities. There are folks all across the gamut. And one thing when you get to know the STS-107 crew, it was one of the tightest crews we've ever flown. The crew actually, we were about a year and a half or so late launching Columbia for technical reasons in the schedule manifest. So as the schedule got bumped, the crew spent more time training together. So they got to get closer and closer. And it just shows you how you can take such a diverse group of people, put them together for the same similar mission, and then execute it flawlessly. And they did. 107 was an executed perfectly of a mission on the crew's behalf. So we're very, it just set a shining example of the importance of diversity that, and diversity, even in a bigger sense for us, is really critical. It's not just a nice thing to say, but diverse opinions. And I'll give you a perfect example. I'm not sure if you've had the opportunity or any of you have watched the movie Apollo 13, but a great movie. So, and Apollo 13 tells the story of the Apollo flight, Apollo 13, in 1970. And we had a problem on the way to the moon, right? So you put yourself back in time, way back in the day, and we had 1967, we had Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin land the first time on the moon. Everything was great, a beautiful moment in humanity to do that. We followed up with Apollo 12, so we kind of got our mojo going, right? We're doing another successful flight. Apollo 13 was to be the next one, right? So we're kind of not routine, but we're all kind of, here's the flight plan, here's the flight manuals, here's the procedure. We've done it twice before, let's go do it again. Except on the way to the moon, something happened, and we had an explosion. And when you watch what happened after that, it's just amazing, and it teaches so many lessons. And I'll give you an example of that, the power of diversity. When that accident happened, and not going through the whole technical, it'll take hours to talk about that, but a lot of things happen in different systems on board the spacecraft. And a lot of these things were influencing the other ones, right? So you start losing oxygen and liquid oxygen, you start losing power generation capability, you start compounding problems. So when you look through your manuals of how to fix the problems, right, these are starting to step on each other. So maybe perhaps similar to an injury where you've got not just, I would imagine an injury is not just one injury. There's probably a lot of compounding or cascading effects, or perhaps other muscle groups that are all interplaying and interfecting each other, right? So hey, things happen to us. We got all our systems are kind of playing out across each other, across the crew's input. So when we got really to understand what was happening in the situation, we realized how more dire it was, right? The crew was running out of oxygen. So we had that problem. We had electrical power being decreased dramatically in the spacecraft. We had an unknown condition with the engine capability. We need that engine to come home. So can we even turn the engine on without causing a loss of the entire spacecraft? We had temperature problems on board the spacecraft. We had problems cleaning up the oxygen environment that was turning into carbon dioxide, and it was going to be poisonous to the crew. So we had all these cascading effects, but we had limited resources, right? We had limited time because we had almost so much time to get the crew home before the crew's going to run out of these things. And we had to come up with the plan and not miss it. We had to catch the diagnosis, if you will, correctly, not misdiagnose the problems that would send us off in another problem and maybe take away other options for us. So, and if you watch what happened with that, right? If you watch what happened through the Apollo 13 experience, there was such a diversity of opinions of how to solve the problem. It was incredible. So, for example, we had a multi-million-dollar system that helped scrub the oxygen environment, keep oxygen clear, right? Because you got a small capsule, you're going to be in there for 8 days. You got to regenerate the oxygen, otherwise it's not going to be so good. So we had a really great fancy system to do that. Well, it wasn't all capable for us to go do that. It wasn't going to be able to get the crew home because of the other cascading effects. So we had to basically rig a system that was not even prepared to operate, basically put a square peg in a round hole to make it work. So we created a multi-million-dollar system out of duct tape, plastic bag, a sock, part of a flight manual, and other components, right? The flight team went over and said, hey, folks, understand everything's in the capsule. Here's all you have to work with. Here's all your tools. It's all you've got is this subset. Go dump those on a table and go figure how you create a generating system that's going to generate oxygen or clean up the oxygen that's in there. You'd think it insane. They did it, right? They actually did that. So having those diverse opinions and people come up with really very unique ideas is critical. And that saved the crew, and we got the crew home. If it wasn't for those diverse opinions, it's not just being nice about diversity. Critical to do that, and I can say this as well quickly. Just having the diverse opinion in the firing room during launch countdown. If everybody gave me the same answer, one of two things is going to happen. Either one, everybody's on the exact same page, and it's a really simple problem, and everybody knows the answer. Or two, it's starting to become groupthink. Okay, there's other influences factoring that, and people aren't speaking up, and I'm not getting those diverse points of view. I would love on the engineering channels to listen on engineering, listen to the different groups start bubbling up conversations, right? And this person thinks this person thinks this. Sometimes they're 180 degrees opposite. But when you boil that down, you can come to a beautiful place in the middle. So again, perfect example, we brought a crew home and saved their lives because of the respect and diversity of thoughts and opinions.
Yeah, for sure. And with each astronaut crew that is assigned to a mission, they have to spend time together. A lot of times they'll go off somewhere to maybe a not so nice area for camping in a week, where they learn to bond and they really delve into what makes people tick, how do they react to areas of stress, and for these days and times, having that ability to listen to those diverse opinions with a greater goal in mind is, I think, the takeaway from the Apollo 13 lesson learned, and how for us as athletic trainers, your mission is the health of the athlete and the patient in your care. And there are many different diverse opinions that you're going to hear. You're going to hear from a coach who wants him or her to play. You're going to hear from a physician. You're going to hear from a parent. You're going to hear from an athletic director. You're going to hear from fans, and we've got to win this next one. And that's just one level of diversity. And you're also, again, as far as taking kind of current events in mind, the black-white issue, the gender issue, the orientation issue, the innate biases that people have with education. How much does somebody weigh? Does that play into it? Those are all things that we need to be aware of to avoid complacency and be the best healthcare provider that we can be. Because if you're, to their known self be true, if you are aware of things that can be hindering your ability to relate to someone else, to come up with the best solution for the care of your student athlete, that's where kind of you have to set the line in the sand and make those critical decisions and have that kind of self-check of who am I, what are my biases with regards to diversity, how is it impacting me positively and negatively, and then how to address it. And we're at a time, today with all the unrest, that we really have to get this figured out and have an honest appraisal of ourselves, of our communities, our workplaces. And, I know Mike would agree with me with NASA. They're exceptionally dedicated to diversity in the workplace and to overcoming biases. And so we are blessed in that regard, and not every place is. And as students in leadership positions and wanting to be in leadership positions, you have to take this to heart and become the change that you want to see. So moving along from that, let's talk a little bit about professional development, because you're students now, you're not going to be students for long. You're going to sit for that BOC exam, you're going to pass, you're going to be credentialed AT professional. Very exciting, get to torture people like Mike on a regular basis.
And Mary has before, so she speaks from experience. So.
I do.
But I'm here standing and better for it. So.
Yeah, he's still talking.
I'm a fan.
Professional development. And again, the timing of us doing this talk and this virtual NATA symposia, it's coming at a time during the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, in my 31 years at Kennedy, we always talked about this pandemic plan, and we've got to have a contingency and when something happens. And never in my whole career would I have thought we would be in this position where we have this virus. It's global. It's causing a shutdown of so many parts of our employment areas and our economy. And we're both teleworking. I'm doing telemedicine. And many of our colleagues in the athletic training profession have been furloughed or losing jobs. And, just this morning, hearing about Boston University wanting to shut down its master's in athletic training program. These are very difficult times and devastating. So how do we overcome that? And how do we improve ourselves and our abilities? And, I mentioned to a colleague, let's think outside the box. And she's like, there is no box anymore. You don't have to worry about the box. You just need to be considering how your skill set can be transferable. And then it also brought to mind, we've been there and done that at KSC and within NASA, where we lost Challenger, or even going back to Apollo 1. Everything shut down, and they figured it out, and they didn't move forward until that time. Same with Challenger, same with Columbia. And so you have to take that moment to really figure out what the root cause analysis is, how you're going to address it, how do you overcome it and become better for it. And then for us at the end of the Space Shuttle program in 2011, we easily off the top lost 6,000 employees at KSC. And people had to reinvent themselves. They had to go back to school. They had to take different kind of jobs. They had to move to different locations in order to support their families. And so that's something, as far as you as an athletic training professional, to really be open-minded about where your skill set can take you. It's very transferable. I found that out myself 31 years ago, going from the athletic environment to NASA, to the occupational industrial environment. And it can be done. I'm proof that it can be done. And there are so many. Well. Thank you. And there's so many resources in that regard. And don't hesitate to contact the leadership within the Strategic Alliance, NATA, the Board of Certification, CATIE, and the REF, the Research and Education Foundation, your district directors, your state presidents. Become a grassroots organization and a grassroots effort to maintain jobs and create jobs and diversify what you can be doing in our profession. Our skill set is so incredibly capable of working in so many areas, which is exciting. Here at NASA, performing arts, Radio City Rockettes, the Blue Man Group, out in Vegas, and the cirque shows, military, extreme sports. The list just goes on, in addition to our critical piece of providing healthcare for our student athletes in the secondary school and college and university. So that's kind of my push as far as professional development And Mike, I would love your 2 cents worth as we begin to start wrapping this up on kind of professional tips for the students to take home.
Definitely. It was exciting to hear some of the different disciplines, because I think of when I'm in pain, I go to my local clinic. But you think of the diversity that you all have in your business to reach out so many different areas and the excitement of all those. So when I go in and talk to folks, I always say, find something you love to do. Make sure you love to do it, right? And Mary can attest to this at Kennedy Space Center, NASA in general, and I imagine a lot of in your field as well. There's so many people that just love to do what they do. It's incredible. And when you find that, and maybe it's working with a collegiate team, maybe it's working with a pro team, maybe it's working in a small clinic somewhere, whatever it is, and in our case, maybe it's launching astronauts, or maybe it's sending probes to Pluto. Whatever it is, if you find it, there's nothing better than that. So that's my biggest takeaway is find that passion, find that area. Don't be afraid to learn. If anybody ever in our business comes and, when I hear anybody ever start suggesting that they know it all, we have a little conversation about that, because that is one of the most dangerous things you could ever feel. And I think that would be not only exemplified by folks that have been here for a while, but I know senior level astronauts that have landed on the moon. And the first thing they would tell you as well is, don't think you know it all. Never stop learning. And if you see some of these gentlemen speak in their 80s now, approaching 90s, they'll talk about the passion for life, the passion for loving people, the passion for learning more, the passion to grow, because you never stop learning. And in your profession, I imagine it's very similar to that. The more you learn, that next patient, you're going to help even more, right? You're going to help the next person that needs your care. In our business, it's the next crew that we're going to get home safely. We've got folks up on space station right now. We want to get them home. So we have to learn. We have to become sharper every single time. So, and the last thing I'll mention to you is, real quickly, is always having that professional development, always having the ability to bring your A game every single time, because you don't know when it's going to be. I can tell you of all the failures and the pre-launch countdown issues, launch countdown moments where you can't catch your breath for a few minutes. All those moments, we never had a warning it was going to happen, right? It just, life came in the middle of it, and there's your crisis. There's your moment to either shine or a moment for something else to happen. And I can tell you the moments during Apollo 1, Challenger, and Columbia where we didn't bring our best game all the way through. I can very seriously tell you the consequences of those. That's why we're so dedicated to taking this message, making sure that our teams and our new teams that are coming on board today that perhaps weren't even born during some of these accidents, they know their history. They know what goes into that. They are so committed to knowing it, believing in it, so they bring their A game every single day. So when that moment happens, or perhaps somebody has an injury or an accident, or it's in the middle of a game, or sometime where you didn't expect it, right? It's usually you don't know the quarterback's going down or whatever. But being ready to jump in that moment, to have all of the tools we talked about, communicating what's happening real time, having the trust between all of the folks that are on the field or in the clinic, right? Having that, having your A game and your knowledge so you can deliver the best service and the best results, and get people out of that situation. Not having any biases and respecting the diversity of opinions of perhaps treatments that are coming forward, right? Having all those tools ready to go, sharpened in your quiver, and when you're called for that moment, you can walk on that field, walking to see a patient, or in our case, get some folks on a spacecraft and save the day. So I want to thank you for listening to that and sharing that. And I'm excited for all of you. I've learned so much about your world through Mary and other folks. I get more and more impressed the more I learn about it, how complicated the body is, how complicated people are. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't matter if it's, engineering, if it's a system, a complicated machine, well, the body's pretty complicated, right? So you can never stop learning. So it's pretty exciting.
Well, Mike, thank you again so much for participating and joining me on this journey, this talk about complacency and avoiding complacency in our profession. And you hit it on the nose. If you're passionate about something, it's not a job. And you will always love what you're doing and constantly be learning and improving your situation. We are available. Our contact information will be made available to you, so please reach out to us. We're going to be ending this session with a very brief video that ends with a comm check of mission control in Houston with Columbia and getting no response. That's something that you don't want to ever have happen. And so take this talk to heart, take the ability to avoid complacency in our profession to heart, and dare great things. Thank you very much.
And our astronauts coming out now as they're making their way to the astronaut band. Commander Rick Husband, payload specialist Dylan Ramon, pilot William McCool, and mission specialist Michael Anderson, David Brown, Laurel Clark, and Colton Chapa.
Go ahead. Okay, Rick, if there's ever a time to use the phrase, all good things come to people who wait, this is one time. And for you and your crew, best of luck on this mission. And from the many, many people who put this mission together, good luck and Godspeed.
Oh, we appreciate it, Mike. The Lord has blessed us with a beautiful day here, and we're ready to go.
10, 9, 8, 7. We have a go for main engine start. 5, 3, 2, 1. We have booster ignition and liftoff of Space Shuttle Columbia with a multitude of national and international space research experiments. Houston now controlling the flight of Columbia, the international research mission finally underway. Roger, roll, Columbia.
Go ahead, Houston.
Yeah, Rick, I guess you've been wondering, but you are go for the deorbit burn. We are going to continue to assess which runway end we prefer, but for now we are happy with the weather at KSC. You are go for the burn.
Houston, here comes SSME high request.
And we're ready, Willie. No deltas.
Copy, no deltas.
We're going to leave visors down now.
Hello, just check your seat.
Banking to the right now, a steep bank of 60 degrees and approaching the west coast of the United States. Columbia speed 16,620 miles per hour.
Columbia, Houston, comm check. Columbia, Houston, comm check. Columbia, Houston, UHF, comm check. Columbia, Houston, UHF, comm check.
That's a wrap on this